and welcome to We Read Allegedly, where we allegedly read books. Got a little bit of a different cast today. John hurt his back. So
it's contagious. It's going around apparently.
It's going around. The bat gremlins, they just get you. So you have me and Squid, but you also, never fear, people, there will be a male voice to be heard. My husband Dallas.
Hello.
Hello.
Let's just be clear. He hurt his back because he's been carrying the bottom shelf for so long on his own.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Someone's gotta. And there's a lot of movies on that shelf, so
He is a machine.
it's heavy shelf.
Okay, but before we get into that, let's play
Bookshelf Roulette!
Squid. What are our numbers?
Our numbers for today's bookshelf roulette is 2, which is the top left corner. 1, which is one shelf down, interpret that however you will, and 20 books in. So everyone go find that book.
Okay, I'm back.
Ouch. Welcome back.
Thanks. Okay. And I brought a book.
I'm glad. That was the whole reason we left. So I'm glad you returned with one.
Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
We should force Dallas to go first because he's new here.
Okay. So you have to
bully him into going first.
Tell us what book you picked. Give us a brief description, and if you've read it or not.
Yeah. So my book is Batman: Dark Knight Strikes Again, which is the second book in Frank Miller's Dark Knight series, and I have read this, and it is actually really good. It is a continuation of like this kind of dystopian future where Batman's come out of retirement and he's doing his thing. And in this one particularly, you run into a lot of superheroes at much older. And the girl that was Robin, Carrie, in the first book has taken on the moniker as Catwoman in this book. And it's really good. I actually have a statue from this behind me of Batman with Carrie on his shoulder. And it's a really good book. I like it.
Nice.
I have, full confession time, never read a Batman book.
Oh.
Or comic.
That's okay. We can still be friends.
Good.
There's a lot of things you've read I've never read.
That's fair.
Well, I picked up a book called Valkyrie by Kate O'Hearn. I've not read it before, but it's one of the ones I got from one of the library sales. And the back says, Freya turned and saw Loki, Odin's trickster blood brother. Earth is a very exciting place. There are lots of things to see and do, and millions of people your age, he said. Don't listen to him, Freya. Oris warned. Loki isn't your friend, and he won't help you. He'll just lead you into trouble and laugh when Odin punishes you. Yeah. So, apparently, it's about Freya.
I hear the main character's kind of flighty.
Possibly.
Probably.
So it looks interesting. It's a YA book. So it looks interesting. That's why I got it. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet.
It's like you picked it on purpose, Celeste. And I
Really?
really love that for us. Because I was originally going to say that I got this book in honor of John, but now I can just say it was to match you. Because the book that I pulled was the Book of Viking Myths.
Oh.
So from the voyages of Leif Erikson to the deeds of Odin, the storied history and folklore of the Vikings, which I've read parts of. I've not read it cover to cover. It's a very short, as far as most like mythology books go. It's pretty short. It's like 180 pages.
That is pretty short for a mythology book.
Yeah, and it goes through like narrative, like depictions of their myths, but then also like some descriptive things of like words that came up or things that are still sticking around that are related to this. Explains who some of the people are, includes things from like the poetic Eddas and whatnot. So
that sounds interesting.
Tiny little not a YA book, but it is a tiny book. So
To be fair, I have a lot of YA books. So,
understandable that you
You
would
have
pull
a
one.
lot
I'm
of
always
books.
surprised when you don't pull a YA book.
right, that's fair. That's fair. Well, because YA is safe. Like, I don't have to worry about stuff I don't want to read.
Yes. I will say I did mildly cheat. I'm sorry, I cheated at this game.
Oh, no.
So my nonfiction shelf, which is always fun, which you really have perhaps a higher chance of me picking a book I've actually read from those shelves.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a smaller selection of books, so I'm always surprised when we actually land on those. But the book that actually came up was one of John Michael's only books in this house. And it's like 1,200 pages and
Oh,
is
God.
a history of private life from like the Byzantine Empire and something
light
along
reading.
those lines.
Little light reading.
And I went, I'm not gonna carry that one into the other room.
No. No. Because, again, back problems. The back
I'll-
gremlins. They get you.
I'll fall over on the way. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It's a history of the private life from ancient Rome to the Byzantine.
Oh.
Pagan Rome, pardon me. So,
It's literally his Roman Empire.
well, you know, a lot of things are, most of them are Rome. So, when
JM is
when
what
that
that trend was
meme-
about.
when it was going around, someone sent it to me because I'm not on TikTok, and I went, I don't even need to ask. It's a lot. And then I did ask him, and his reply was, more than most people.
Yeah.
I went,
Yeah.
yep, it tracks.
Yep. Okay, well, that was our game. So let's get into the book. So this month we are reading a book that has a disputed name because it just depends on where you get it as to what name it is,
It's
apparently.
like one of those, you know, those holographic cards that move depending on which way you're looking at it?
Yes.
That's
yes.
this book.
So it is either No More Bullies, No More Bullies for those who wound and are wounded, or it is called The Wounded Spirit.
Good luck finding the book.
It's pretty much the only, well, I say that. I actually haven't looked. It might not be the only nonfiction that Frank Peretti has written. It's the only nonfiction by Frank Peretti I've ever read or heard of. But the Goodreads synopsis says this: if you've ever been there, you've never forgotten how it feels. It's being undersized or oversized or less than beautiful. It's knowing you are vulnerable and that someone is ready to take advantage of your weakness. It's the fraternity you never wanted to join, the Fellowship of the Wounded Spirit. And Frank Peretti is a member too. In this powerful book, Frank Peretti shares his deeply personal story of growing up different and the persecution he suffered because of it. And from the reservoir of memories, he urges this groundbreaking work shows how we all, bullies and victims alike, can find both healing and forgiveness from the anguish and torment associated with the growing epidemic of bullying. And I think that this book was originally published in 2003. So
I believe you. I'm not going to fact check it.
I have a copyright of 2000.
okay, that tracks. Because it mentions in the book that it's after Columbine. So that was 99, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fun story. That's one of the first major news stories I remember.
Oh, wow.
Now, the front of my book says previously published as The Wounded Spirit. So apparently that's the old title.
Yes.
Okay. I've just seen it multiple ways.
Me too. Searching for it. Putting in No More Bullies Frank Peretti and getting a book with a completely different title by Frank Peretti is a wild experience. Like
I'm sure it is.
Wait a minute. Did I spell that wrong with none of the same letters? What is going on?
Wait. What's happening?
Dallas, this was your pick, right?
Yeah. I suggested it. Why?
my toddler question time.
Why?
Tell us why you picked it.
Yeah. Well, this is one I was actually required to read in college. In one of my classes I was taking. and it was pretty impactful for me. There's a lot of conversation on the front end, especially in the first few chapters, that uh, I see a lot of myself in them. There's a lot of mirroring to my personal medical issues and social experiences I had of being bullied. So it hit me kind of special, and the back half of the book specifically helped me to shape a lot of the way I do things in life, both in ministry and outside of ministry. And so that's part of the reason why I like this book. I actually have in the past required student leaders to read this, just to kind of give them a different perspective on things as they deal with teenagers and other people.
Nice. I can see I can see a conversational part of this book being good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like having people to talk through as you're reading it.
Yeah, that's what this is built for. This is not a, "Oh, let me just read this casually." It is a definitely a curriculum conversation in a group type of situation.
Yeah.
Now for me, I had to write a paper on it and talk about some of the themes and make practical applications from the themes found in the book. But moving forward, like I said, it was built for you to do stuff with people. It wasn't necessarily a pull off the shelf type of thing.
Right. I just remember this is the second time I've read that book, and the first time I read it, I didn't realize how old Frank Peretti was,
Mhm.
and so I was like, "Why was this hospital not sued?
Hey, this seems illegal.
Right?
Hey, this seems like malpractice. What's going on here?" And I'm, like, getting upset for him and his family because 'cause I'm like, "This is an issue."
Yeah.
And then I
For
was like,
context, he was
"Oh,
born in 1951. He's 73 years old.
yeah, that would have been before people would go, 'Hey, malpractice.'"
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it
This
was a thing, but it wasn't as common a thing.
this
So,
I'll be honest and also say that I didn't know who Frank Peretti was. So
oh,
That's fair.
I've never read his other stuff. And I just Googled him right now, apparently, because I didn't think to do that up until this point. And he wrote The Hangman's Curse, which is one of the
yeah.
few movies I remember seeing and probably contributed to my deep and uncomfortable nope for spiders.
Oh, I don't
Yeah,
think I realized.
I feel you on that one. I watched that movie too. That
That
one
movie is
and
wild.
Arachnophobia added that for me. But
Mm-mm.
yeah, he's a for context, I don't think I've read any other books by Frank Peretti but this. I remember the movies that people made because I worked at Hollywood Video at the
Mhm.
time.
Hollywood.
And
Say it correctly.
sorry, it's habit.
I know, but some people aren't gonna know what you're talking about.
Hollywood?
We
No.
have youngins that listen to this.
So, but no, the whole series itself, all this stuff it's interesting. There's a lot of spiritual undertones, and depending on who you talk to, they have different views on whether or not it's good fiction or not, or if it's
Yeah.
just awkward propaganda. Mostly people I've seen that have some sort of like um, bad experience with the church don't like his stuff. Um, Other people are just like, it's all right.
I do think if I went back well, I didn't know The Hangman's Curse was a book before it was a very interesting movie that I probably shouldn't have seen and will not go back to watch again. But I do think that I would perhaps not super love them, but I don't love a lot of things. So that's not saying too much.
I will say I read 3, which is a thriller of his, and at like 17, I called the ending.
Oh,
Like I went to my dad who had handed me the book and I was like, "Hey, this is what happens, right?" And he's like, "Oh, you finished it." I'm like, "No." Like
nope.
he writes entertaining books.
I
Yeah.
don't think he wrote 3. I think he might
He
have
didn't. Oh,
co-wrote it.
that
It
was
was that
Ted
was
Dekker.
that was Ted Dekker. Ted Dekker and Frank Peretti were kind of synonymous for a while because they were both in that genre doing
Is is Ted Dekker the one
suspense.
that did like Red or something?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
black, red, and white apparently.
I
But
also may have confused the two of them until I
but yeah, they're kind of the few guys who are in the Christian space doing suspense horror
Mhm.
type of stuff
Yeah.
that people was actually decent. Like people who were secular were like, oh yeah, this isn't terrible.
Oh yeah. The
movies weren't great, but
no, movies are terrible. The Circle trilogy, which is the one where it's like red, white, black, green,
Yeah.
was highly entertaining. That was Ted Dekker. But so never mind what I said about 3. That has nothing to do with Frank Peretti. Have I read Frank Peretti except for
know.
this book?
Well,
Or have
welcome
I
to our
just
book
read
podcast. Allegedly, Celeste has, but
or have
we'll
I
never
just
know.
have I
I-
just read Ted Dekker?
I think I did listen to the audio version of This Present Darkness, which was his first novel that he put out.
That title
Back in
sounds familiar.
came out in like 86. I remember like in the early 2000s, there was an audio book that people were like passing around youth groups talking about. I think it was dealing with some of the end time stuff. And, you know, the early 2000s was all about the
Yeah.
Left Behind and people
Or was
wondering
it?
what was biblical and what wasn't biblical.
And
Apparently
just Y2K in general.
right.
Yeah.
Apparently I have in fact read This Present Darkness.
Oh, cool.
I don't remember that, but according to Goodreads, I read it.
Nice.
So, and I read The Visitation. That's right.
You've done a lot more than you thought you did.
I have.
None of which are the book we're talking about
No.
today.
I'll say this also, just for context, who he is. He's also done a lot of kids stuff, and he did
Yeah,
a
he
TV
has.
show for a while also that was for kids.
Oh. I probably didn't watch that either, but
No.
you never know.
I don't know. Weren't you part of that whole like what was that audio drama thing?
Adventures in Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
It's
I
very
was
much in that
part.
vein.
I just found another name for the book.
What
It was
Another one?
also published under No More Victims.
I think
that's
that
right.
was a continuation.
It was published at the same time. And has the same
Wilds.
has the
Mr. Henry's
same
Wild and Wacky
stuff.
World.
I don't know. Frank, get your stuff together, bud.
Frank, pick a name.
If Frank listens to the podcast, I might fall out. But
oh my gosh. Hello, sir. We love you. You are loved. Okay. But
You're great.
so anyway, even though we confuse you with Ted Dekker.
Yeah.
Which
No, so No More Victims was a continuation of The Wounded Spirit. It's a 64-page book.
Oh, I wonder if it was included when they did No More, like when they changed the name, if they just smashed it all together. Because there was a bit of a disjointedness with the beginning of the book and the end of the book. Like it almost felt like it was a revised edition that he had continued the thought with. So I wonder if that's what happened. If they went, hey, these 2 books really are really short. Let's put them together. So, but yeah, are you gonna say Squid?
I once again going down the Google rabbit hole. I may have watched his show. It's unlocking things in the back of my brain that I think I may have blocked out based on the few snippets I'm seeing.
Memory unlocked.
Like I remember his outfit, and that's about it. So I don't know if I like watched it or I saw VHS tapes, but
it might have been one of those things of like it was on in the background, because there's definitely some kids shows that I'm like, what was this? Because it was just on in the background while I was playing at somebody else's house.
Yeah, or even just like at kids programs and stuff. I don't know. I don't know. It looked familiar.
Squid. Yeah. That's hysterical. So I will
say,
what
I'm here for.
I don't. It feels weird to be like, I liked this book, but it was a topic that I feel like when it was released was very much needed. If that makes sense.
I will instead of being like no spoilers, I think a very important premise for this book is any negative or critical reviews of this book is not in any way belittling the experience of being bullied or abused. Nothing bad that we might say about this book is saying your experience is invalid and is not worth talking about. It's just about the book. So take that to heart, please, and thank you.
What you got, Squid? Because that's your ramp up for I'm about to tear it apart.
Yeah. Well, I will say I didn't dislike the book.
Okay.
Which is usually where I start, and that's as good as it gets for the rest of the talk. But I also didn't really like the book
That's
for a
fair.
number of reasons. Actually, I think I wrote more about this book than I've written for most books that we've reviewed on the podcast.
Yeah.
Did you dislike it more than Musashi?
No.
Okay.
Oh.
We're good. We're good.
But see, those are
very different worlds.
It's not apples to apples, but the
Yeah.
level of
You just asked her to compare an
distaste-
apple to a taco.
yeah,
The-
like the
the
level
levels
of
of
distaste is not the same, but my concerns or dislikes for this book are more rooted in like actual deep issues rather than just this is a really boring book.
Gotcha.
So this book is a nonfiction dealing with a heavy topic, so the things that I don't like about how it did it are more important than just me saying no one should read Musashi ever.
Right.
That's
Which
fair.
was a terrible book.
Which I stand by. So
We're sorry.
I hold to that. Unless
sorry,
you
John.
read in the original Japanese, and then maybe it's better.
I don't even know if John ever finished that book.
I don't think he did, but he's not here to defend himself, so
I
have
did
no
get
fear.
multiple hours into that book.
It's and probably still not that far into it at that.
It's chunky.
Boy.
It's
Yeah,
a- it's a chunky boy.
big book.
So this book.
Yes. Back to this book. My main issue was really just that I thought it was not deep enough.
Oh, okay.
And that most
Yeah.
of what he talked about was like generalized to the point that it felt reductive,
I can see that.
which I feel like at the other side ends up making the topic feel less important.
Interesting.
So I'm like, I wish you weren't quite so flippant in how you handled some of these things. Even just some of his like descriptors made me like, well, take it more seriously than that, please.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
kind of, because I naturally bring humor to serious topics, I appreciated the humor because it made it a little more palatable for me. But I can see why you would want him to go a little deeper with some stuff.
Yeah, and I don't mind lighthearted parts. I did find that most of his were in connection to when he tried to get spiritual too, which it made me feel like he was trying to like soften it and make the Bible more like palatable, maybe, instead of just being like, all right, and now let's look at the Bible, see what it says.
Well, and also this is someone who's not normally, like, he wrote no other
Yeah.
nonfiction. So he normally is like, here, let me scare you. Not
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, it's very, you can tell he's not really a fiction or nonfiction writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Just the way that like he opens up, where he's trying to not categorize, but he's trying to frame everything within a fictional story to allude to
Yeah.
something bigger. It's very much in that style that he does within all of his other books. It should be pointed out also, like, again, like I said, this is not meant to be a standalone book. Like, if you look at the back of a book, it's like, hey, by the way, we have a workbook, we have a leader's guide, we have a curriculum. Like, it's meant to be here's a conversation starter for you
Mhm.
guys move forward. We also have to remember, though, that just time for this is very much time locked. That's one of the biggest issues
Yeah.
with the book. This is written on the heels of Columbine, which was it was a wake up call for a lot of people in
Yeah.
our generation. I'm trying to figure out, Squid, how old are you?
I am 31.
You're 31. How old were you when Columbine happened back in '99?
I would have been 11.
6.
Yeah. So I was like 15.
Yeah.
And so for me, like the conversations that this brings up were super raw because they weren't being had.
Yeah.
And he talked about it towards the end of the book about how, maybe this is, we're progressing past this, in which we had, thankfully we were beyond a lot of the stuff that was in this book.
Yeah, we are.
Today. Because
Well, yes and no.
yes and no, correct. We're beyond some of the base level stuff
I
of
would
it.
maybe that it might be more my problem because I find that I disagree with that statement, and I think bullying is worse now.
Oh, okay.
And so, I mean, we're past thinking about Columbine as much, but we're also seeing more shootings in schools, more connected to these things. And you're also the avenues with which kids now, and anyone really, you don't have to be a kid to
Mhm.
be a bully. And a lot of bullies
think
aren't.
when I say that we're past some of these issues, I'm talking about the silence of the issues.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
back in then, it was silence. There was no talking about it. There was no bringing up stuff. And I'm saying back then, like it's like 1,000 years ago. This we're
1,000
we're
years
only
ago,
28
yeah.
years removed, but 20 years is almost is half a generation.
Yeah.
Today,
Yeah.
it is far more vocal where we talk about these things. It's on television all the time. It's we are having these conversations in spaces. I have friends who run whole ministries that are devoted to anti-bullying stuff, and so that's what I mean. You're right. We have a lot of bullying happening today. It's just now we know about it. We talk about it,
Yeah.
and which is great that we got to that point, that we
Yes.
can talk about it. And that's again, I think that was the crux of a lot of what his book was that we have to recognize that this is a thing that is taking place and it needs to get fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's one of the biggest problems with the book today is it is time locked in a time frame where we just didn't. It
Right.
was suck it up, buttercup, and move on, which still happens in some spaces.
Yeah. Which it's hard to disconnect the historical context of where he was
Mhm.
with what it is now, because also some of my problems with this book is also the problems I have with today's conversations.
Oh yeah.
The conversations are just happening now,
Hmm.
whereas my problem is just how he's presenting stuff. Because I
Right.
found, aside from just like kind of generalizing or trying to be reductive about some of the things that happen, I also felt like a lot of how he presented it was just like black and white
Mm.
Mm.
in a way. And he's coming from an experience where he talked about being bullied a lot. He does
Hmm.
mention also having bullied others later.
Yeah.
Much smaller section of the book.
Much
Right.
smaller.
Much small, not handled in a way that I thought was super great either. But before that, and through a lot of it, he like very black and white that like even though he's making these points that everyone's made in God's image and we're meant to love people, didn't really feel genuine most of the
Okay.
time when he was talking. And especially because he was making so many points to connect. Everyone is part of God's creation. We're all God's children. And then didn't provide any scriptural backup for this. He mentioned like 2 verses in the
Right.
whole book, and sometimes only just the reference and not even the scripture itself,
Right.
and was like, as you'll see in Proverbs.
Right.
I'm like, well, then tell us what we'll see in Not everyone's going to know what's there.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell us more.
Yeah.
And one time, which part of the things I said about like the jokes before, is the jokes he made in connection to like scripture or things that he thought people like should know, quote
Hmm.
unquote. He had one quote where he said he was quoting scripture and said, "If we confess our sins," and then added his own comment in the middle. It says,
Right.
"Sure, you know the rest.
Right.
He'll forgive us and cleanse us of all unrighteousness." I was like, well, some people don't know that.
Right.
So
Right.
adding that comment is kind of bad taste in your mouth if you're that person that's like, well, what do you mean he's going to do that? Like,
You're right.
What does that mean?
wait a minute. So there were just, it was where he used the humor that sometimes was
I can
more
see
of
that.
my problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again,
I
very important topic.
Oh, yeah. And I think it was like I wrote a review to I have taken to reviewing all the books that I read because it helps
Mhm.
me kind of remember what I've read. Also helps me process it a little bit. And I wrote that it was probably one of his best works because he is so vulnerable about it.
Mhm.
Like I agree it would have been better had he gone into a deeper dive with scripture. But the passion that it was presented with because of his testimony is again well, and I listened to the audiobook, so the narrator did a really good job of
Mhm.
giving that emotion behind it. Also his mom is the MVP for sitting on the sign so that they could
Go.
change the tire in the snow.
Oh yeah.
um I listened to that part and I was at work and I paused it and I looked at my coworker. I was like, "I am listening to a book right now." And she goes, "Okay," because I'm almost always listening to a book.
Yeah.
And I was like, "This is what just happened." And she goes, "What the?" And I go, "Yeah, so if I'm making weird faces, like it's not you." And she goes, "Okay."
I aspire to be that willing in my life.
I just had to like mentally put myself in the place of this woman with her husband going, I need you to come out in all of this snow and bounce on a sign, but
I
hold the
realize
baby
you're
in.
about to give birth. However,
Let's do some
if you could
calisthenics.
just do this one little thing for me, dear.
Yeah, just a little bouncing. Yeah, so that had to be said. But yeah, I appreciate the passion. I do think that if he had written this book with somebody else to handle more of the, "Hey, this is the scripture side of thing," it could have been
Mhm.
much better. I understand that it's meant to be talked about, it's meant to be a discussion piece so that you do come into an awareness of going, "This is how I'm going to approach people."
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
we tell our students in the youth group that no one gets left behind, which means that if someone's alone, you
Ohana.
Ohana, you check on them. They actually probably would understand Ohana better. Um, but you check on them. You make sure that they're part of the conversation, and they are very
Mhm.
good at doing that. Of going, hey, you're being real quiet. Let's pull you in, and it's a good little community that we've built with them. But
Mhm.
it does stem back from Dallas reading this book and then living that out.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had some influence, but I can't pinpoint
Well,
it.
You had some influence, absolutely.
I can't
So
pinpoint it, so I'm just gonna it's there somewhere.
I was in there at the time. I don't know.
It's a thing. Um,
That's we all live it out. That's the
but
thing. And
but I do think that book would be more impactful if you had someone like Dallas come in and go, "Okay, this is what he's saying, but here's
yeah.
the backing behind it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like and your the critiques are honest. Like what is your scriptural reference for why everyone is created in God's image?
Yeah.
Like how does this play out? How does this work out with us taking care of folks? And but again, the contextually this was meant to be a conversation starter for a curriculum, everything else. And this is also in the
Right.
back end. He talks about in the book how he the started really with him giving a speech for the first time
Yep.
about this. And now again, he writes it like he does his fiction stuff, where he's telling stories, and I think that's where a lot of the power comes in is
Yeah.
the storytelling and retelling his own issues he grew up in. Um, the
Honestly, when he switched from narrative to the rest of it, that's kind of when I started to lose interest
mhm,
Yep.
because I'm like, "Okay, I can draw the conclusions you're wanting me to draw, so
right,
I don't need you to walk me through this."
yeah,
Yeah.
But the narrative side of things was very well done.
yeah, very
I
much the testimonial side of things.
Yeah.
yeah, I do think like if I'd heard him give this talk,
Yeah,
I'd have a lot less critiques.
yeah,
But because I'm sitting down to read it, I'm like, well, okay, but
yeah,
it's not a talk, so you have to do extra legwork now.
yeah, exactly.
So we're not
To
there
be
to have
fair, if you had been there when he did this talk, you would have been 6.
well, yeah, I wouldn't have understand it fully, but I was probably
He probably still does
probably a
these
bully
talks.
then
Probably.
still anyway. So
I
it might have
mean,
changed. My role on We Read Allegedly may have been changed forever if I had been in that talk at 6 years old.
I don't think so. Dallas, I cut you off earlier. I'm sorry. What were you
No,
saying?
no, I was saying, just agreeing with you guys. I mean, back then, he probably still does these talks today,
Yeah.
obviously, and so, but it is like you said, like the portions where it's more the narrative side of things, where he's telling the story, again, the testimony of like where he got bullied, and on the back end, I appreciate where he comes back on the back end, where he talks about where the switch happened and
Yeah.
that monumental change of just one person going, "Hey, are you okay?" And then
Mhm.
share that pass forward about the fact that just being present for people and trying to set the atmosphere. I also did appreciate the fact that trying to find the chapter. Was it yeah, it's in the help for the wounded. He gives some very practical, like, all right, do this, do that, do this, do that. Like it's very base level stuff that's very practical about how to make a change in the attitude, how we see people and how we do things.
Yeah.
And like if you've been a jerk, how to overcome that. And then I also appreciated the back end of it where he was like, we talked about briefly about trying to see people who have been bullies in a different
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
the whole aspect about a lot of these bullies have been bullied themselves, stuff like that. Like I just found out um, 2 years ago. I had a buddy of mine who went to school with me. We were both bullied, and there was one kid specifically that I remember just being a grade A jerk to me. And we were talking, and he goes, "Well, XYZ situation." I'm trying not to give too much personal detail,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but there's a situation with his family that was super bad, super abusive. I had no idea, but
Mhm.
seeing that and then it filtered through the kid coming on to what I experienced, it made sense. And so the whole idea of trying to see them in a different way, not that it excuses it at all. There's no excuse for it, but it helps us to go, let me see if we can view them differently. They're hurt just as much as we are being hurt ourselves.
Mhm.
And taking on that responsibility of ourselves and going, I don't need to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I do think like this book, I know you said you make like your youth leaders read it. I feel like this would be a good book to make a high school group read
Yeah.
Mhm.
and then have someone guide you through it who then can
Right.
add that extra like,
Yeah.
all right, let's find this in scripture.
Yeah,
Let's
I
talk
think
about
the
this.
guidance side is a key aspect, which again, I'm
Yeah.
kinda curious. I would like to track down the actual workbook because I
Well,
never
see,
actually saw the
like
workbook
it's
and
funny you
see
say
what
that because
that's.
my book like doesn't mention it at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like they mentioned that he has a video
Mhm.
and that's it.
So, yeah, mine's, like, right before it talks about the video, it's a list of, like, his books, like The Oath, The Visitation, and then it talks about the Wounded Spirit workbook, the Wounded Spirit Leader's Guide, and the Wounded Spirit curriculum.
Oh,
Um,
yes, I do see that.
Includes 1 workbook, 1 leader's guide, and a 45-minute video.
I am curious what would be in there.
I
I
am
am
too.
too.
But I feel like I'd pick it up and then I'd be like, I'm gonna make my own, thank you.
You're
Do
right.
it. Like, what's stopping you?
Potentially. Yeah.
Allegedly. No.
Allegedly, that's what I would do.
So, I
Um,
think that it's not a perfect book, but it is one
Oh,
that
no.
causes me to think and go, and it did shape it. It changed a lot of the way I saw some stuff. And again, when you have the personal experiences and you
Right.
see things that have taken place, there was one aspect we talked about forgiving these people.
Mhm.
And
mhm.
again, I don't want to give specific names or anything. I know of somebody specifically who was terribly abused by as an adult by someone close to them, a another adult in their family, and got separated from the situation for their safety's sake. Literally, it was a safety thing, and that was years ago. And today, nearly 30 plus years later, they have been able to forgive that person. They're friendly with that person. That person now contacts them asking for advice and help, and they move forward. And when you look at the situation, you're like, there's no way that this should be happening with the way they treated you. But that is the grace and the love of God that has poured through them to that person that was legitimately an adult bully.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I've seen these things play out. And so he gives principles like you, Squid. I wish there was more here,
Mhm.
and I really, really want to get a whole hand on the curriculum just to see what more there is, because I've
Yeah.
seen these things played out in real time. And then again, this is where it comes to your point. If there's somebody to guide people through it,
Mhm.
Yep.
man, that would be gold.
Yeah. Especially on like that topic. I almost wish he'd spent a lot more time on it.
Mm,
Because I think it's one of the places we get into trouble, so to
right.
speak. Uh, and you have to be, very careful in how you deal with things, especially after actual has like abuse has taken place and things
Right.
like that.
Hmm.
But no matter how bad it is, it doesn't mean you're like exempt from having to forgive people. Like
Yeah.
that is a call that we have.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have to become that person who is giving advice to them now and is friendly with them.
Right.
There may be some situations where you go, I've forgiven them, but for literally safety's sake, I'm going to maintain boundaries and stay
Yeah.
away. Uh, doesn't talk about that part in there so much, but
Well,
also like kind of toes the line in one of the places where it started to get a little self-righteous,
Mm,
I which kind of tips into the other problem where if you have gone through something bad, you can very easily hit that point of being like, and now nothing I do is wrong
Yeah.
because I'm justified in this because they did this bad thing to me,
Yeah.
or, however you end up, even just that I haven't been able to forgive them yet. And in that way,
Mhm.
I'm punishing them for something that I'm still holding on to. And then that becomes your issue and not theirs.
Well, and even if you are aware of the fact that you need to forgive them, sometimes, especially in situations where you have been abused,
Hmm.
you have to daily go, I am choosing to forgive them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And remind yourself of that, because if you don't consciously make that choice, it's easy to fall into the pattern of they hurt me, they don't deserve forgiveness.
Hmm.
Hmm.
There's
Well, if
a
that's the case, then nobody does.
yeah. About page 138, he's talking about some of that forgiveness aspect. And he goes, one of the most important steps towards healing of a wounded spirit is to forgive. It can be tough but if you don't forgive those individuals who have hurt you in the past, bitterness will eat you alive, rob you of a peaceful future.
Mm.
And he goes on to talk about the need for us to forgive these individuals, and that because that's really what happens is of forgiving people. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, they're all angry about the idea of forgiving people who have hurt them. They're like, well, they haven't asked for it. Well, too bad.
Yep.
like you be holding on to the bitterness. I mean, that does nothing to them at all. And half the time, especially when it's stuff like this, and this
Yeah.
is the thing I had to come to grips with as an adult, was half these cats who hurt me as a kid have no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
And me
We
being
are,
angry at them does
you know,
nothing to them. It
humans
just
are remarkably good at not noticing other humans. So
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
it
And
does. Go ahead.
no, it's just one of those things we got to look past that. And like you said, like the book does he does kind of toe that line a little bit of like, at the same time and again, I wish there was more on the
Hmm.
chapters where we talked about him going through and having to realize he himself is flawed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Again, he mentions it very briefly in that one chapter, as then he goes on to the whole conversation as people as a whole, and you recognize that perhaps they have been bullies
Yeah.
just as much. And but I think part of the problem is there was that whole section where he was talking about the value of people,
Mhm.
where he just kind of he goes off hard on that whole aspect about the value of people, and he goes into kind of he goes kind of a pseudo rant about evolution and all that kind of stuff, and the response of people, how the argumentation of there's no absolute truth, there's none of this stuff. His response to that was almost too hardcore, if I can put it that
Hmm.
way.
Mm.
Like, it wasn't just, "Hey, here's the reality of that conversation," which I can go with, because he kept going on and on and on.
Yeah.
That's what led into that self-righteous
Yeah.
feeling for some of it.
I had that page marked actually. The one that
Yeah.
where he mentions like it's logical. And I was like, well, it's not logical for everyone. Like
Yeah.
if
It's like
logic was the only thing we needed to be right, then a lot
yeah,
more people would be saved.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's an emotional aspect of it. And that's like for us, when we teach our students, uh, emotions are not real. They're just not. They feel real though. And we have to take that into account when we interact with people, when we talk with people, and when we do life with people. Because if we don't take that into account, the truth will never impact them the way it needs to.
Yep.
We've put up a stumbling block before them. And so now, does that mean that we bend to the will of emotions? And no, not at all. Truth is still supreme over all things, but it does affect how we approach people.
There's like 7 things you said through that. They're just making me think of more things I want to say. So I've started writing a list so I don't forget.
All right, I'm going to shut up now so you can talk.
It's just 3 things actually. Uh One was kind of that like having to forgive someone even though they didn't ask. Reminded me of a song from Sleeping at Last, one of his Enneagram series. And there's a quote in his song 1 that just says, "Grace requires nothing of me."
Mm,
It's like, you really have to put that in perspective of saying, I didn't ask God for forgiveness.
right.
And
Mm.
hey, he did a lot more. So,
Yeah.
ooh, maybe we should pay attention to that.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, even that goes into the conversations because Jesus says, if we don't forgive, we can't be forgiven. And he goes into the whole parable about the man who he owed a lot, and the king just waived it, and then he in turn just goes after another man who owes him even a little bit with no
mhm.
grace whatsoever, and the king's like, "What are you doing?" And
Yep.
so that's the whole thing is we've been forgiven of a lot.
Yes, we have. From a lot more than just a lack of a friendship.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the part where he talks about, like, realizing he's a bully and asking people forgiveness. I hope he actually did that.
Mhm.
That was one of the parts where I was like, "Hmm, this seems a little performative just in your book. I hope you actually
Right.
didn't just write this paragraph to say, 'I'm very sorry I did that, everyone out there.'"
Right.
I hope you actually got in touch with those people.
Yeah. I think that's that fear right there. I had the same thought. I think it's the level of the skepticism of our generation
Yeah.
Mm.
that we all have we've grown up into. We're like, "Did you really do that? Did you really say that?" Like, we're all I'm skeptical of my own self whenever I actually was there for things, you know?
Yep.
Like, "Did I really
Right.
do
Right.
that?"
That's
Uh,
relatable. And
so
there's
was the other
also
thing? Oh,
no, go ahead.
sorry.
There's
Oh,
also
the
the no, you go
No,
ahead.
you go now, Celeste.
I'm
I'm sitting
just
back.
rabbit trailing, so it has
Good, so
nothing
am
to
I.
do. So go.
Oh, mine was just a book recommendation, based on what you said about emotions not being real and, needing to learn to work with them. But there's a book called Untangling Emotions.
Hmm,
It's not again, it's not the best book I've ever read, but it's some of it is going to be really impactful for some people, and some of it's going to feel really surface level for others, just depending on how you read your general devotion slash nonfiction Christian self help life books. Whatever genre that is. The general Christian book. But it's pretty good kind of about just recognizing how those emotions in yourself are contributing to those things.
Mm.
right. You said
Now
there were
you go,
3 things.
Celeste. Those are my
Oh,
3 for now. I have book recommendations pertaining to this book, but
I
I'll
don't
save those for
remember what
the
I
end.
was gonna say, so you're good.
This is why I started to make a list, because I sat there like, wait, I just had it. It was just there.
I feel like it wasn't important enough. It was more just a bouncing off of what Dallas had said. And so but it wasn't terribly important. So we're good. It's fine. It flew away, so it's not important.
Well, in that case, if anyone wants to do further reading on general trauma, abuse, not necessarily trauma and abuse, but depression, dealing with mental health, getting better, helping others, etc., uh, 2 books that are not Christian books that came to mind, one of which I actually just read last month, is The Body Keeps the Score, which is Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma, which kind of just breaks down how humans react to trauma and kind of internalize it, and how you're not just mentally do you have scars from trauma, but you
Yeah.
can actually have psychological changes, you can have physical changes, all kinds of stuff, and how to approach that and help others. Shh. And the second is What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. Uh, Both of which are, they're non Christian books, but they have some really good, psychological standpoints in them and just practical advice. And then in the process, I was looking through my wish list. So these are not books I've read, so I can't vouch for them fully, but they've been on my list since I was at uh, the Urbana conference like 3 years ago. And I just didn't want to spend so much money on books while I was at the university conference. Uh, so I haven't gotten around to them. But one is Companions in the Darkness, Seven Saints Who Struggled with Depression and Doubt, which
Mm.
is, I felt like, kind of pertained just because depression also tends to go hand in hand with some of these things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then one of the co-authors on that book actually wrote a book called Healing What's Within, Coming Home to Yourself and to God When You're Wounded, Weary, and Wandering, which seemed like it might be a good follow-up to this, perhaps with a little more of that depth that we were looking for.
Mhm.
And then Preventing Suicide, a handbook for pastors, chaplains, and pastoral counselors. For
Yeah.
anyone that is in the I'm going to lead a workbook on this to a group of people, maybe also pick that one up and be ready to talk about it.
Yeah. That's one thing. When you start opening this conversation up for things, it opens door. There was a story that he shared in the book that I appreciated, which was that a buddy went to a men's group, and one dude opened up about something, and it caused another guy to realize, hey, I was in a different side of that thing. And that's a real thing when people open up doors and they're willing
Mhm.
to have these frank conversations about what they went through. It changes things, and it changes the atmosphere in a room, and it honestly allows people to have healing. And that was the whole point of the book was let's start talking,
Mhm.
let's start having these conversations so that we can appropriately deal with them.
Yep, absolutely. I think this whole book was spiritual takeaways, but if
Yeah.
anyone has
Yeah.
a specific one they wanna
Um, I got one just kind of on the backside of it. There was a couple times in it where he talked about how um there's always that question of why do I do this? Like why do I
Mhm.
have to go through this whole ordeal? Um and why do I have to suffer? And that's the problem of evil is one of those things that we continue to deal with. And um the Lord does redeem stuff. Pull up that scripture real quick.
while you do that, I forgot I had 3 physical books sitting beside me that I was also gonna recommend. So
Do
I'll
it.
just read these titles while you're finding the scripture. One of which is Made for Friendship, the relationship that halves our sorrows and doubles our joy. This is kind of like you just mostly about like suffering or tough times,
Mhm.
including the book Being There, How to Those Who Are Hurting, which is specifically about grieving or suffering or general disability, being there with people who are going through hard things. And then When Words Matter Most, Speaking Truth with Grace to Those You Love.
Nice. So the verse I'm thinking of, Romans 8:28 says, and we know that, and he vaguely references this in the book. He goes, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And when he's talking about that whole conversation there about God works all things, it doesn't mean that life is all, rainbows and unicorns. Life sucks.
Yep.
Um,
Amen. Say it
I
again.
mean, I mean, it does. Celeste and I have a friend who he's a rapper, and he has this line. It goes, "Adam and Eve bit the fruit, and the fruit bit them in the butt," and that really is. I mean, life is. We live in a fallen world, and that's why we have evil. That's why we have these things that take place. That's why we have depraved individuals who hurt other individuals. But and I want to quote from our book. Frank says, "God does not waste an ounce of our pain or a drop of our tears. Suffering doesn't come our way for no reason, and he seems especially efficient at using what we endure to mold our character." And that's the thing is we go through hard times, but God will redeem things. He will work things
Mhm.
out to for good. And it may not be what we expect. It may not be the way we want it to be, but He will use that, and then He will use us to for lack of a better word, operate in that ministry of reconciliation to help other
Hmm.
people, to reach out to people. Like I said, my experiences being bullied and the things I went through as a kid, it has shaped the way I do student ministry as a whole and the way I treat people in general. And I think there's a lot of people who are doing different things, and it's a direct result of what they've been through in the past and God using that in their lives to go, we can do better. We can help make sure other people don't experience this way that I have or at all, period.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think we've said pretty much all we are going to say
Should
without
I
getting repetitive.
read the review that John sent us?
Yeah,
Which
go
Oh,
ahead
yeah.
was
and put
pretty
John's
close to
thoughts.
what I was going to say. John just said it in a way that is unique to how John says things. Uh, so John's review, he's not here. He hurt his back, so I will not be doing my impression of John, but I will read this for you. No More Bullies is very much a product of its time and industry. It follows a trend of its time of exploiting and sensationalizing personal trauma for the sake of making a difference. The problem I find with these types of books is that the people who should read them don't or won't, because if they had an inclination to do so, they wouldn't need it in the first place. Essentially, typical 90s Christian bookstore echo chamber to be displayed next to the newest Twyla Paris cassette. Its heart is in the right spot, but its execution only made me feel gross. Just
Yeah.
shining reviews from John.
Yeah. And I think some of it's getting misplaced because he's missing the context of where it came out. I get what
Yeah,
he's saying. And it
yeah.
again, but the context is not to be a bookstore thing. It's a conversation starter for a group as a whole.
Yep.
Mhm.
If it was just that, if there wasn't the workbook or there wasn't other aspects of it, I'd be right there with John. I'd be like, yeah, no,
Uh,
but there's more to it. But I see where he's coming from.
Yep.
okay. Well, so long and thanks for all the fish.
Bye.
Bye.
We Read Allegedly is part of the Devoted Geeks Network, devoted to letting you know that you're loved. This month, we read No More Bullies, or The Wounded Spirit by Frank Peretti. Next month, and every first Saturday of the month, you can join us as we read a new book. We'll be reviewing the year next month as we look back on 2024. We'll see you there.